I want you to imagine the sound first. That's how I remember it. Not the sight, the sound. Wheels on tile. My own wheels, my own suitcase, dragging behind me at 11:40 at night through a terminal that had already gone half to sleep, the fluorescent lights buzzing low. A janitor's cart squeaking somewhere behind the vending machines, and my phone pressed so hard against my ear that I could feel my own pulse in it, ringing, ringing, ringing. My son picked up on the fourth ring. I remember that too. Not because it matters, but because I'd counted. When you're standing alone in a place that isn't home yet, you start counting things. Rings. Footsteps, heartbeats, dad, just that. Flat. Already tired of me before I'd said a word, I told him where I was. Terminal 4, international arrivals, just past customs, standing under a sign that said ground transportation like it was mocking me. I told him I'd texted the flight number 3 days ago. I told him I just needed a ride, that was all, 30 minutes, maybe 40 with traffic. There was a pause. And in that pause, I heard something in the background. Laughter, glasses clinking, music low and rich, the unmistakable sound of a life happening without me in it. Dad, I've got people over. It's not really a good time. I want you to sit with that sentence for a second because I did. I stood there and I let it settle into me like cold water finding the bottom of a glass. Not a good time, as if I'd asked him to donate a kidney. As if I hadn't spent 41 years making sure every single moment of his life was in fact a good time. Just grab a cab, Dad, he said. And then, so casually it almost impressed me, he hung up. I stood there with the phone still against my ear, listening to a dial tone that felt louder than any airport announcement. And I want to be honest with you, my first instinct wasn't anger. It was something quieter and worse. It was the specific private humiliation of realizing that somewhere along the way, without a single dramatic moment to mark it, I had become an inconvenience to the two people I'd built an entire life around. I called my daughter next. I told myself she'd be different. She always had been, when she was small, the one who used to wait by the window on the nights I flew home from business trips, nose pressed to the glass, counting headlights until mine turned into the driveway. I held onto that memory like it was still true. It rang twice. She answered breathless, already halfway through a sentence that wasn't meant for me. Dad, hey, can I call you back? I'm actually about to head into a thing. I just landed, I said. I heard my own voice and it sounded smaller than I meant it to. I was hoping one of you could. Can't you just take a cab? Or an Uber? A little laugh, not cruel exactly, just careless. The kind of laugh you give a stranger who's asked you for directions you don't have time to explain. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Love you, bye. 4 words, delivered like a receipt being torn off a machine. And then the line went dead a second time, and I stood in that terminal holding a phone that had just told me, twice, in 2 different voices that used to call me daddy, that I was on my own. Here is something nobody tells you about getting older. It isn't the knees. It isn't the eyes needing stronger glasses every couple of years, or the mirror showing you a stranger wearing your father's face. It's this. It's standing in an airport at midnight, 68 years old, having just flown 14 hours across an ocean, and realizing that the people you'd have walked into fire for wouldn't cross a parking lot for you. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that because there's a version of this story where I break down right there under the fluorescent lights, and that's not what happened. What happened was quieter, and in hindsight, far more dangerous. Something in my chest went very still, very calm. The way the ocean goes still right before something enormous moves underneath it. I wheeled my suitcase outside into the wet heat of the night, and I got into a cab. The driver was young, maybe 30, with a photo of a little girl taped to his dashboard, her gap-toothed smile lit up gold by the streetlight sliding past. Long trip? He asked, glancing at me in the mirror. You could say that, I said. Anybody meeting you? I looked out the window at the city going by, all glass and light and indifferent motion, and I thought about my son's laughter in the background of that call, about my daughter's 4 rushed words. I thought about 31 years of birthdays I hadn't missed, recitals I'd sat through in stiff auditorium chairs, tuition checks I'd written without a single complaint, a wife I'd buried 4 years ago while both of them stood beside me at the graveside and promised that we'd take care of each other now. No, I said. Nobody's meeting me. He must have heard something in my voice, because he didn't ask anything else the rest of the ride. Just drove, the radio murmuring low, the little girl in the photo smiling her gap-toothed smile the whole way home like she at least was glad somebody's father was coming back. Now, I need to tell you something about myself, something my children have never fully understood, maybe because I never let them see it. I did not get where I am by being a man who forgets things. I do not forget a slight. I do not forget a kindness either. But tonight, in that cab, it was the slights doing all the talking. Because here's what my son doesn't know. Here's what my daughter doesn't know. They think their father is a retired accountant living comfortably on a pension and some modest savings. They think the trip I just come back from was a routine visit to old business contacts overseas, the kind of trip a bored old man takes to feel useful. They have no idea what I actually built in the last decade, quietly, patiently, without a single announcement. They have no idea whose name is on the foundation that's about to make national news. They have no idea that in 72 hours they will be sitting in their own living rooms, remote in hand, and they will see my face fill their television screens. And in that exact moment, everything they thought they understood about their father, about their inheritance, about their future, is going to come apart in their hands like wet paper. I didn't plan it that night, sitting in that cab, not exactly. But something shifted. Something that had been patient for a very long time quietly decided it was done waiting. The cab pulled up outside my dark, empty house. No porch light on, nobody had thought to leave one on for me. I paid the driver, thanked him, and stood on my own front steps for a long moment before I went inside, looking up at the black windows of the house I'd raised them in. And I made a decision right there that I am not entirely proud of, and not entirely ashamed of either. I decided that if my children no longer had 30 minutes to spare for the man who gave them everything, then perhaps it was time they learned exactly what everything had actually been worth. I went inside that night and I didn't sleep, not really. I sat in the dark of my study, in the leather chair my wife used to tease me about, and I opened my laptop and I looked at the folder I hadn't touched in almost a year, the Ashworth Meridian Trust. That's the name on the foundation, though of course my children have never heard those words together, because I built it that way, on purpose, quietly, through lawyers who understood discretion, through a board that had never once needed to put my face on anything. 11 years ago, after I sold the last of my business interests, I didn't retire the way people assumed I did. I didn't take up golf. I took the money, more of it than either of my children have ever imagined, because I never let them see the real shape of what their mother and I built, and I started funding things. Scholarships for kids aging out of foster care, a rural hospital wing 2 provinces over, a literacy program that had, just that year, expanded into 40 schools. I did it without my name attached to a single plaque, because I didn't do it to be thanked. I did it because after a certain point in life, you start to understand that meaning doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being useful. But here's the part I hadn't told anyone, not even my lawyer, until that week. The foundation had grown so large, so quietly successful, that a national broadcaster had been trying to get an interview with its founder for over a year. I'd always said no. That night, sitting in the dark, I picked up my phone and I said yes. 3 days later, I sat under studio lights across from a journalist with kind eyes and a sharp voice, and for the first time in 11 years, I let them say my name on camera. I let them show the hospital wing. I let them show the scholarship recipients, grown now, some of them doctors, one of them a judge, standing in a row and calling me, on live television, the reason they had a life at all. And I said one more thing near the end of that interview that I want you to understand I said very deliberately. The journalist asked me about my family, about who would carry the foundation forward when I was gone. And I looked directly into that camera and I said that I had recently made some changes to my estate, that the foundation going forward would receive the majority of what I'd built because, and I quote myself here, "The people who deserve what you've spent a lifetime building are the people who show up for you, not the people who assume you'll always be there to show up for them." I didn't say their names. I didn't have to. My daughter called me 40 minutes after that broadcast aired. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, because I had counted her ring the night at the airport, and some petty human part of me wanted her to know what waiting felt like. Her voice was shaking. Dad, was that you on the news? The foundation, the dad, what is going on? Why didn't you ever? I didn't think it was relevant, I said, and I meant it to sting because it was the exact phrase, almost word for word, my son had used on me 2 Christmases ago when I'd asked why he hadn't invited me to his promotion dinner. She started crying. Not the performative kind, the real kind, the kind that catches in someone's throat before they can stop it. The estate thing, Dad, what did you mean? What changes, Geets? My son called 40 seconds after she hung up, like he'd been standing beside her the whole time, which as it turned out he had. Both of them in her apartment, staring at the same screen, watching their father's quiet second life spill out into the world in real time. He didn't bother with pleasantries either. "You can't be serious," he said. "You're giving it all of it to strangers? To some foundation? Dad, that's supposed to be ours." And there it was. 11 years of careful, silent generosity, and the only sentence either of them could produce, in the very first minutes of learning who their father truly was that supposed to be ours? I let the silence sit there long enough that he had to say my name twice before I answered. 3 days ago, I said, I stood in an airport at midnight and asked my children for 30 minutes of their time. Neither of you had it to give me. So no, I'm not being unreasonable when I say I'm no longer certain you deserved the thing you didn't even know I had to give. That's not fair, my daughter said. On the other line now, too. Both of them talking over each other. You never told us how much you. Would it have mattered? I asked. And that quieted them, because we all knew the answer, and none of us wanted to say it out loud. I want to tell you that I hung up right there, cold and triumphant, and let that be the end of it. But that's not the truth, and I promised myself I'd tell you the truth. The truth is, I sat on the phone with my children for almost 2 hours that night. And for the first time in years, they weren't rushing me, weren't distracted by dinner parties or somewhere they needed to be. For the first time in years, I had their full, undivided, terrified attention. And somewhere in that conversation, something honest finally came out. My son admitted he'd been short with me for months because he was drowning in his own life and too proud to say so, and it was easier to be curt with his father than to admit he needed him. My daughter admitted, through tears, that some petty part of her had started resenting how much space I still took up in her life 4 years after her mother died, when she thought she should have already learned to need me less. None of that excused the airport. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of being tired or busy or grieving in your own complicated way that excuses telling your father to just grab a cab at midnight after 14 hours in the air. But it explained it. An explanation, I've come to learn, is not the same as forgiveness, but it's the road that leads there, if you're both willing to walk it. I didn't reverse the estate change. Not entirely. I want you to understand that too, because this isn't a story about a man who threatened his children and then folded the moment they cried. The foundation kept its majority share. But I did carve out something smaller, something symbolic, held in trust, and released only in increments, tied deliberately, unapologetically, to presents. Birthdays attended. Holidays shown up for. Phone calls answered on the first ring, not the fourth. Some people will hear that and call it manipulative. Maybe it is. But I'd spent a lifetime giving freely and unconditionally. And it had taught my own children that my time, my presence, my love would simply always be there, static and endless. No maintenance required. I decided at 68 years old, standing in a dark house with no porch light left on for me, that the people I loved most needed to learn the same lesson every stranger who ever mattered to me had already learned. That love, real love, isn't owed. It's shown up for. If there's one thing I want you to carry out of this story with you tonight, it's this. Somewhere in your life, right now, there is someone who has been quietly, patiently waiting for 30 minutes of your time. A phone call answered, a ride to the airport, a seat saved beside you at dinner. They may never tell you what it costs them when you say you're too busy. They may simply go quiet, the way the ocean goes still right before something enormous moves underneath it. Don't wait for the cab ride home alone to become someone's turning point. Answer on the first ring. You don't always get a second chance to prove that someone still matters enough to make time for.